Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 24th of July, 2022. It's good to have you here. Hope everybody's doing well out there and has had a chance to work on your sound projects this week. Let's go ahead and jump into our agenda. And before I forget, I do need to do one thing here. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, today's signal chain, we're back to our regular signal chain. Actually, we were back last week as well, but just for review for those that are interested, it's an Earthworks Ethos microphone, which you see right here. That's going into the Rupert Neve Design Shelford channel, which is basically a preamplifier, an EQ, and a compressor, and also has a saturation thing, which we're not using. That goes into the Canon C200 camera, which is what we're using for our primary camera here. That combines the audio and video and then sends it to the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, which we then use the output of that to go into a Decimator 12G cross, which converts it from HDMI to SDI. And then that cable runs around the room, out into the other room, into a Pearl Nano, which is what encodes it and sends it to YouTube. So that's what we've landed on as kind of our standard kit right now for live streaming, and it's working pretty well. We also do have another little thing here as far as audio is concerned. We have Danny over here.
Hi, wherever you are. I was going to say good morning, but it's not even good morning here now. It's good afternoon. So
afternoon, yeah.
Hello.
So Danny is on a Mix Pre and Shure KSM8 microphone over here on a separate channel coming directly into the ATEM. So that's how we have that routed. Okay. All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about RX Spectral Repair. For those not familiar, Izotope RX is an app that is useful for audio cleanup, for video and film production. And what we're going to do here is talk about some parts of the spectral repair, and then we'll come back. We had a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then of course we'll go after that to the chat here and just have a fun discussion and answer any questions or have a, we'll just talk audio. So let's, with that, go ahead and jump into RX Spectral Repair and what that's all about. So again, this is for situations where you have noise in your recording that you don't want and you want to see if there's a way in post to clean it up. Obviously, we advocate for always making sure that you get clean audio in your recording itself. Sometimes things outside of your control can happen. And so, in fact, what we're going to do here, let's switch on over to Izotope here. Let me just play a little sample of what we're going to be working with here. Here's my audio sample. I was the only person available when I did the recording here, so you are going to hear my voice both in the sample and me explaining it, but here's what the audio sample we'll be working with. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone, and I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how realistic it is to be able to clean those up. Let's see what we get. Okay, so that's what we'll be using as our sample. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Izotope RX and where this is available. So we'll switch back over here. All right, so first of all, there are three different, I guess, versions, or I think they call them versions. I can't remember. There's a special term they use, but there's the Elements version of RX, the standard, and the advanced version. And what we're covering here today is available in the standard and advanced versions. It is not available in the Elements version, just for clarity for everybody. So if you do have the Elements version and you're looking around and you can't find it, that's why. It's only available in standard and advanced. All right, so here is what Spectral Repair does. Now, first of all, if you think about the name Spectral, we're talking about the audio spectrum. So Spectral Repair allows you to repair just particular parts of the overall audio spectrum. So if there's something at a particular frequency that you want to clean up, this allows you to do that. And it almost works like Photoshop in some ways, and you'll see that in just a minute. But here's a good text descriptor of what it does. First of all, what you do is you select the noise you want to repair, and then Spectral Repair will reduce it to the level of the noise floor or replace it with audio from around the selection, and you get control over which of those it does. Or thirdly, it can actually generate entirely new audio to fit the selection. So it actually can synthesize audio to create the repair, if you will, of what you're trying to do. Now, we're only going to talk about the first two today. The third one is another topic in and of itself. But that's generally what Spectral Repair does, and it'll become a little bit more clear as we jump into it. So there are 4 different modes when you're working with spectral repair. They're situated, in fact, if we switch back over to Izotope here, RX. Go ahead and switch on over. There we go. We have 4 tabs. So we have Attenuate, Replace, Pattern, and Partials plus Noise. Okay, so coming back, I'm making, there's kind of a workout for Danny and the control surface here today. So those 4 modes, we're going to talk about Attenuate and Replace, and we're not going to talk about patterns and partials today. We'll come back to that another time. Pattern and partials plus noise, what those do is those essentially synthesize new audio to replace the audio that you're trying to repair. So that's a completely different thing. What Attenuate does is Attenuate takes the audio, the parts of the spectrum that you have selected, and it just reduces them by looking, and what it essentially does is it tries to make it sound the same level as all of the other ambient sound around it. And we'll kind of dive into that to show you exactly what that means. And then Replace does a kind of a different thing. Instead of just reducing the level, it looks around it and actually replaces what you've selected with the sound around it, the ambient sound around it. And this is really useful for cases, for example, if you may have a gap, maybe for some reason you have a gap, some weird cut was made, or maybe, whatever the case may be, if you need to fill in some room tone to kind of make it less jarring and obvious that you replaced something there, that's what Replace does. And so we'll also demonstrate that on this same audio clip here. Okay, let's start with Attenuation mode. Let me just run through what that means here. So again, this removes sound by comparing the selection. Again, you select a very specific part to the surrounding audio. So it compares what you've selected to the surrounding audio. It then reduces the magnitude, and there's a typo there, apologies for that. It reduces the magnitude or the level of the selection to match the level of the surrounding audio. So it's just kind of trying to blend it in a little bit by making it less obvious. So it makes your selection more similar to the surrounding audio. So let's jump over to Izotope RX again, and we'll show you how this works. So here I have the Spectral Repair module open right here. You've already heard the sample. And what's very interesting is you can see distinctly, actually I should also say, we were going to switch from waveform mode into full spectral mode. You can also do kind of a combination of both if you wanted to. And actually compare to see what it looks like. So here is what it looks like. The blue is what it looks like in waveform mode. And the orange trace here is what it looks like when you're looking at the spectrum. Okay, so what the waveform is good for is really understanding amplitude and overall loudness. And then the spectrum is good for understanding where in the audio frequency spectrum the sound is actually coming. So here is the little ringtone, and it sounds like this, just as a reminder. Okay, now we have there's also a fan in the background. I tried to make a pretty nasty sample here, just so we could have multiple things to be fighting with in terms of noise. But what this represents, if you look at the y-axis here, this is the audio spectrum. So down at the bottom are the low frequencies. 100 is right here. And then at the top here, we have 20 kilohertz, and you can zoom in if you needed to. But what this is representing here is that the initial tone from that ringtone comes in somewhere around 500 hertz. And then you also have this kind of thing that sweeps up from probably about 300 hertz up to very distinctly around, well, I would say 800 hertz. It kind of does that weird sweep. And then you also have another tone that's part of that is somewhere around 1 kilohertz. And then you also have these traces up here, you'll notice. Those are probably harmonics as well, and maybe some reverb as well. So you can see it kind of makes these little pillars here. So that's how you can find those noises in your audio clip. Now what's interesting, I'm going to move this over here. This one is playing kind of between phrases, but I start talking again before it even finishes playing. And then this one here starts while I'm still talking, then I take a breath and keep talking after it finished, or as it's almost finished playing. So this overlaps with the dialogue, and I wanted to do that as well to demonstrate what this tool is capable of and what it's not capable of. Or if you do find it is overlapping with dialogue, what are your chances of being able to successfully clean it up without affecting the dialogue too much? So we'll take a look at all of those. So let's go ahead and start with this in attenuate mode. So I have attenuate selected here. And we have a few different settings. We're going to come back to the settings in just a second, but the first thing is you have to select the parts that you want it to clean up. So we're going to do the very simple one first. It's a good place to start. So I've got my brush here, and I can actually just select the bits here that are part of the overall sound. Now, I can do it in multiple parts here, so I just did one selection. Now I can hold down the Shift key and add to that selection. So I want to add just a little bit there. Definitely need to include this in it. And then we've also got this bit here. And then we have these that extend way up into here. And we have this little shelf right there as well that's part of it. I need to just add a little bit here. Okay, I think we got it selected. All right, now we're in a good spot to start applying our settings here. Okay, so let's take a look at the different settings here. So we have, first of all, bands. And let's switch back over to our description mode here and talk about what the bands are. So Danny, if you'd switch back over to our agenda here. All right, so bands selects the number of frequency bands used for interpolation. So it's basically increasing the resolution, the number of frequencies that it's looking at to figure out what's going on here. So a higher number of bands can provide better frequency resolution, but also requires a wider surrounding area to be analyzed for interpolation. So that's a trade-off. If you've got it right on top of dialogue, that can be kind of tricky. So you may have to tweak that. The default is 512. You can actually go down as low as 128 and up to as high as 4,096. A lower number of bands is ideal for processing short selections or transient signals. And I would say that what we're doing here is probably closer to a transient. It's pretty quick. So we're probably going to start with 512 and see where we end up from there. And then as far as other settings here, we also have a surrounding region length. Let's switch back over to RX. And you'll notice here there are these, it's very faint. You might be able to see it, but there's these little brackets around our selection. And that's indicating the region that it's going to look at to make the correction. Okay, you may have to be on, if you're on your phone, it might be hard to see this. But if you're on a bigger computer and you can go full screen on the video, it's a little easier to see. But you'll notice here as we increase this, the size of that either grows or shrinks depending on how we set it. So it's looking at a larger area. Normally I would start at 100% and then you can adjust it from there. You can also, related to that, we have this before and after weighting. If you know, for example, in this case, we know that the audio before this is probably where we want to do most of our sampling. That's where we want the plugin to look for information for how to reduce this, as opposed to after when I start talking, because once I start talking, we don't want it to look at that. And we want it to look at that before that. So we can actually change the before-after weighting to before, and it's going to do, you'll notice that when I move that, the little bracket at the end moves away from the dialogue a little bit. Or if I say, oh, look more to the aft or to the after weighting, it's going to look more after. So that's how you can adjust and kind of tune where it's looking to get its information to make these decisions. Okay, we also have direction of interpolation. So you can tell it where to look to get information about how to make the correction, or how to, in this case, attenuate the signal. So we can do it horizontally, and you can see that's what we've been looking at so far. It's been looking before the sound in terms of time, where we have this little breath in between when I'm talking and when the ringtone goes off. You can also tell it to go vertical. So if you wanted it to look above and below, you could have it do that. In this case, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But you could also go 2D, which it looks both above, below, and to both sides. So in some cases, that may make sense as well. If you really don't have anything on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis to look at, you might try the vertical and see how that goes, or maybe even 2D if you have lots of space to look at. But we might actually go 2D on this one, because we've got this room tone here. So that's, the fan is running here. We've got some other crud there. We're probably going to clean that up in the end, but just using that as kind of a baseline to help it understand what we're looking for here. We can do that. All right, let's switch back over to our settings descriptions here. The strength, of course, just adjusts the strength of attenuation, and that number varies from 0 to 4. The default's 2. We'll start with 2 and see where we go. There's also a checkbox called multi-resolution. So the multi-resolution mode allows for better frequency resolution for the interpolation of low frequency content and better resolution for the interpolation of high frequency content. So it just, I think in essence what it's doing, if we switch back over to RX here again, this box here, multi-resolution, I think what it's doing then is it's saying that the bands, the low frequency bands, don't have to be the exact same size in terms of overall frequency range as the higher frequencies. So it just gives you a little bit more separation there. Under most circumstances, I would probably go ahead and leave that checked and let us do its thing. So let's go ahead and let's do a process. Let's do a round here and see how it comes out. So I'm going to render, and now let's play it. Okay, you can still hear it a little bit, but it's not nearly as present as it was. So let's undo here. I'm going to go ahead and render, actually, let's go ahead and increase the strength to 4, see what happens. And then play that again. Kind of weird breathy thing. Let's render again. Yeah, still kind of weird. I'm going to undo that. Okay, let's adjust some of our settings a little bit. I'm going to go back to horizontal. Let's go ahead and back to, actually, strength of 1, it looks like is the default. Go to a strength of 1. And let's undo this multi-resolution. Let's just go back to our regular weighting there, before and after. Let's reduce this to 128 and see if that makes a difference. It's 1 render. 2 renders, 3 renders. So it's still there, very much there. Let's see how it sounds. Okay, and then before. So it's just pulling the levels down just a touch. That's a lot more transparent, I guess I would say. You can still hear it, but it's not quite as prominent. So that's one way to do this. Let's go ahead and try replace. So let's go back to our settings and take a look at replace mode. So the idea with replace mode is the idea is to replace badly damaged sections, such as gaps in tonal audio. It completely replaces the selected content with audio interpolated from the surrounding area. So this is a little bit more intrusive, potentially. And you can see if we switch back over here to RX again, it is, it doesn't give you as many settings to work with. So here, for example, I might just say, hey, look before the audio. That's what we want to use to kind of really figure out what to replace it with, because I just really want nothing. I don't want any dialogue there, of course. And you can change the length of what it's looking at. We can actually crank it up to 200% because we don't really have anything else there, and that's really what we want it to be looking at. Let's go ahead and try that. Interesting. We'll do a couple renders there. Let's play that back and see what it sounds like. Just so that we, interesting. Yes, you could still hear it. It definitely left some artifacts, but let's undo. Whoops. Got to go forward just one more spot. Here we go. Okay. So, there's a sample of what you can do there. Now, you have to put your headphones on if you really want to hear it, but I mean, we could definitely use that replace and pull it out almost entirely. Let's actually go back in and do something that would be a little bit more mild, a little bit more realistic here. So I do have to select it again. So I'm going to go ahead and select this here. Shift to add to the selection. Okay. And shift again to add. Whoa, getting a little crazy there. Let's clean that up. And then there was a little shelf right there. That's part of it. Okay. Good. In this case, let's go ahead and turn on the multi-resolution. And we're going to do some experimenting. Let's drop the number of bands. Render. Let's hear what that sounds like. Does a weird breathing thing. Undo that. Let's increase the number of bands to 4,096. Wow. And we want to probably reduce this. You'll notice that when we did that, it's looking way ahead where we're still talking. We don't want it to look into the talking, I don't think. We're going to pull that back. And let's have it render again. Play that again. A little bit of breathing. Let's play through the whole thing to hear what it sounds like. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how realistic. I think what I would do after that is then I would probably come in here with voice denoise and do this adaptive mode. Let's just drop it to maybe 6 dB. Maybe preview that a little bit. Between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for between phrases, just so that we get a sense for between phrases, just so that we get a sense for, okay? So that's one way you could approach it to get something that sounds a little bit cleaner in the end. Let me just make sure we got, okay, we're good there. All right, so that's the replace and that's the attenuate. Now, let's go take a look at these over here. These are trickier because they're embedded within the dialogue, and this one in particular is overlapping. Let's see what we can do with that and see what it does to the dialogue, just out of curiosity to see, again, kind of just testing the boundaries of what this tool is capable of doing. So let me first go ahead and make a selection here. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight where that is. Now, one thing that's interesting is actually, let's undo that. You can change the size of the brush here, and that's actually advisable. If you just click and hold on the brush tool down here, you can actually change its size. So we can make it a bit smaller here. And the idea here is that way it cuts less into the dialogue. Oops. Gotta select that again. Okay, now I have to press Shift to select the other bits. There's this part here. There's that. And then I'm going to go ahead and bump the size of the brush up at this point and get this bit up here. Whoops. Undo that last part. Oh no, that just Command-Z undoes the full previous step, not the selection. So just FYI on that. That was my mistake there. Okay, selecting again. You can see this is obviously a pretty tedious process. So this is not the kind of thing that you would do on every single audio track every single time. It is something you would do for special purposes where you're working on something kind of special and you want to really clean it up, or you have something that's otherwise a perfect take in terms of performance, but for whatever reason, something got muddled up in the recording. Okay. All right. So I'm going to try with the attenuate there. I think attenuate makes more sense in this case because, again, if you do the replace, we'll come back and try replace, but let's start with the attenuate. And I'm going to go with the default settings here. We can look at 2D, so we can have it look above, below, and to the left and right. In this case, I think I would want to have it weight more towards the end. Maybe not. Yeah, more towards the end, but not such a large region on the right, because that's when I start talking again. Let's go ahead and try this and see what we get. There was one render. Let's do another one. And one more. Okay. Again, doing more extensive processing so you can get a sense for what happens if you do too much. Phone. From our phone. And I'll even put one in. Turns into more of a horn. So let's undo that. And one more time. And I think one more time. Yes, okay. So we still have our selection. Let's go to replace. Actually, let's go back to the default settings. Let's do that. Default there, strength of 1, 512, horizontal. Let's try that. That was 1 render, 2 render, 3 renders. It's really not doing much. Here you can hear phone. Okay, so it feels like we're a little bit up against the kind of the limitations here if we went with the default settings here. Let's go with multi-resolution and kind of tune our settings again. We're going to go 2D and 3D, or sorry, 2D. And I want to bias it toward the after. Pull the surrounding region length in. Go ahead and try that. And one more time. Okay. Now let's play that tone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here. Okay. That actually could be workable. So you can see how you kind of have to experiment a little bit with how things work there. Let me just undo those here really quickly so we can do another sample here. So that actually could work. So attenuate may be a good option here. Let's go to replace and see how that works here. Okay, so here we're choosing our weighting is going to have to be some before and some after. Well, we could actually tell it to look mostly after and pull down the amount of time that it looks at things. Let's go to the default of 512 and with multi-resolution off. Let's see what we get here when we render this. 1 time. 2 times. Ooh, look what it's doing here. Visually, that's not looking promising. Let's hear what it sounds like. Ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put, nope. Don't want to do that. Command Z, back to where we started. Okay. Let's try multi-resolution. Let's go back to the defaults on those and let's see what happens. Yeah, see, look, it's just kind of smearing it. And the reason why is it's looking at the dialogue here and kind of trying to figure out what to do with this and replace it with that. So that doesn't make any sense. So in this case, when it's overlapping, attenuate may be your better bet. So there's a look at things. Let's go ahead and switch back on over and take a look at the chat and see if anyone's got questions in the chat there. Danny will take a look through things for us and see what we've got here. Yeah, I think I covered all the settings there. Okay, Jeff, as a reminder, you can hold Option to remove part of your selection when selecting your area. Thank you very much. That is a good tip. So Shift to add to your selection, Option to remove part of your selection. Appreciate that. Christopher, what this really demonstrates is it's always better to get the audio right at the time of recording rather than to just fix it in post. Absolutely agree. Yes, completely agree, Christopher. When those circumstances happen, and they do sometimes, I don't think it's ever healthy to have the mindset of just fix it in post, because just fixing it in post can be extraordinarily expensive and time consuming, as we just saw here. However, if you have something and it's the only thing you can work with without doing a reshoot, and a reshoot isn't realistic, I just wanted to demonstrate you have an option. So Linda says, sometimes you're the editor and not the person who captured this mess. And that's true. I've been in that situation before. So Camille says, how many renders do you recommend? I'd recommend trusting your ears. Do one, listen to it. If you think maybe another one would help, do another one. So it's just total experimentation to find out what's going to work best. So don't have a recommendation on the specific number of renders. Well, I do have one recommendation, and that is if you're using the attenuate mode, let's switch on over to RX again. I would probably go with generally with the strength at its default, maybe at 1, and do multiple renders rather than crank it up to 4 and do 1. So that's where I would start. Who knows? You could experiment and do 4 and see if that works better, but I would generally start with the strength around the default and do multiple as opposed to cranking the strength up and doing just one. JF says, no AOK inspired rainbow spectrum today. Well, let me just show you what he's referring to here, what JF is referring to. In the spectrogram, if you come up here to the view menu in RX and you go to the spectrogram settings, you can change the color map to, I think this is the one right here that AOK uses.
Are there two rainbows?
There are two rainbows.
What's the other one?
The other one is this.
Oh, yeah, maybe it is the other one.
So
I don't know.
AOK is Austin Olivia Kendrick, who she was part of our Dialogue Edit Mix Master Challenge, and she recommended using this when you're working in spectral mode. So it's a little bit jarring to the eyes. It will sear your eyeballs a little bit, but it also gives you a little bit more clarity in terms of what's happening and what the different spectrums are. You know, to make a little bit more separation between the intensity of, or the magnitude in the terms that Izotope uses, of the audio at different spectral values at different hertz. So struggling for words, but yes, we can definitely use this version. It's a bit much on the eyes, but it is also very informative. So thanks for that, JF. All right. I think that's everything we had prepped for that. So if you do have more questions, we can come back to that. But let's go ahead and jump to the questions that were submitted ahead of time. First one is from Keith. I'll go ahead and read this. I realize that's really small. He had a lot to say, but Keith says, I bought my first Electrosonics wireless back in 1988 at NAB, Las Vegas. None of my Electrosonics are legal these days. When he says they're not legal these days, what he means by that is that at the time, back in 1988, the spectrum that was usable within the United States was at different ranges than it is today. So when he bought those back in 1988, they were built to work within a range that is no longer legal to use today. So yes, it still works technically, but it's not legal to use those spectrums without a license, or maybe even at all. I don't know which spectrum the old 1988 Electros were using, but along with that, Keith has, I have a Sony ECM77B terminated for them. That's a lavalier microphone, I believe. I am now using Sennheiser G4s for wireless. It would be nice to use the 77 on them. So he wants to use his older Sony lavalier microphone with his newer Sennheiser G4s. I ran across by chance someone selling an adapter to use the mic on the G4 and ordered it. The first one was lost by the US Postal Service. Oh dear. The second one made it happy day, I thought. Tried using the adapter and plugged the mic using a G4 into a Sound Devices MixPre 3. Wow, such noise, ear piercing. Tried my other wireless and mics, no problems, all working as advertised. It seems that either I'm doing something terribly wrong or the adapter is a faulty solution. I'm thinking I should just bite the bullet and have the mic re-terminated. That is to say, putting a new connector on it that's made for the Sennheiser G4. I did cheat and put the batteries into the wireless Electro and tried using the MixPre 3. Worked fine. Okay, so what this tells me, Keith, is that the Sony microphone is working just fine as originally designed. That the Sennheiser G4 with its own microphones that came with the kit most likely, or whatever other microphones you were using with that, work just fine. When you add this adapter to this between the Sony and the Sennheiser G4, that's when you get the ear-splitting horrible noise. What that says to me is that the adapter is probably the problem right there. So, and also you used the Sony with your Electro more recently without telling anybody, and it worked fine as well. So yeah, I think it's probably best to go ahead and get that re-terminated would be the best solution. If anyone else has other insights, I can say that I know that some of the wireless systems have changed. Now, 1988 was quite some time ago. That's, over 30 years ago, 5 years ago almost, 33 years, 34 years ago. The different wireless companies have changed the terminations that they've used over the years, and so it could be that the adapter you bought was for a different generation. Even though it has the same connector as yours, they may have actually terminated, used the different pinouts in different ways. So I'd probably just have it re-terminated. So that would be my advice there. Okay, the next question is from you, and I often have to use a steno mask. It's like an oxygen mask with a lavalier mic and some foam in it so others can't hear what you are saying when you speak into it. And in fact, just for context, it looks something like this. So you talk into the padded part there, and then of course you plug the...
Wait. Sorry.
Wait, Danny switched us up. um, Here we are. So that's a steno mask. You talk into it. And where I've typically seen these used is for translation, like real-time translation service. Historically, if you have a public speech of some sort going on and there are going to be people there that don't understand the language of the person giving the speech, you can have translators using those steno masks and speaking their translation into that, and then there's a wireless feed to the people in the audience that need that translation. So that's typically where I've seen that used. The trouble is that it makes you sound like you're talking from the bottom of a fish tank because you are talking into a little cup, basically. I've just picked up a Rodecaster Pro 2 and would love to use any onboard processing to improve the sound from the steno mask. Any suggestions would be amazing. If the Rodecaster Pro is not the best option, what audio plugin could I use in post to improve the sound of these recordings? All right, well, let me just do this here. I'm going to switch back over to RX. I have Ewan recorded a little sample here. I think there could be a copyright issue here, so I'm just going to play one tiny line. Let me just change the Spectra view back to something that doesn't sear everyone's retinas, as my friend McGuire likes to say. All right, this is just a one-liner so you can get a sense for what this sounds like.
Because this is very important.
Okay, here it sounds really muffled and kind of hollow. But the first thing I think the first thing I would do is apply an equalizer, and you do have an equalizer in your Rodecaster, so that's definitely an option for you. And I think the biggest thing really is applying a high-pass filter. So what I would do is I've got a 24 dB per octave. It doesn't matter. You can use any low frequency shelf or high pass. And let's just highlight this. And I think we can get this to play repeat. There we go.
Because this is very important. Because this is very important.
Let's go ahead and bump that up. I'm going to go pretty high, 140 hertz.
Because this is very important. Because this is very important.
Okay. Go even higher.
Because this is very important.
Oh, I got to preview it.
Jaguar. Because this is very important.
Too high.
Jaguar. Because this is very important.
Okay. Not going to sound great. And honestly, I will say this, Ewan, if we can go... normally, I've seen those used for translation. I don't know what the context is in which you're using them. I will say this. I am highly doubtful that you can make something that will sound beautiful in terms of like a studio quality recording because of the constraints of that device. That device is made largely for translation or other circumstances like that. It's not necessarily made for the most amazing audio fidelity. So that's one thing. I would apply a high pass filter that removes some of that kind of boominess. It makes it understandable and probably less fatiguing to listen to, but it doesn't sound amazing. There are some other things you could do as well. And if we switch back to RX, one thing that you could potentially look at is called spectral recovery. So you'll notice that this is pretty boomy. And in fact, you can see on the spectral trace, there's not a lot of high frequency. There's basically not much beyond about 7 kilohertz. And so you could potentially use this to render out some additional stuff there. Let's just do a preview and see what that sounds like. I'm just going to use, let's just go to the default settings here and preview it.
Jaguar. Because this is very important.
Okay, you can see it's stressing the CPU a little bit, trying to get through that, so it was pausing. Let me go back to my EQ, and I'm going to go ahead and render that. And then let's go ahead and preview this again now.
Jaguar. Because this is very important. My Jaguar. Because this is very important.
Okay. So just so you're aware, so that's about I I suppose that's about the best you're going to be able to expect here. It's going to be tough, and there's a lot more you could do with the spectral recovery to help with that, but it's going to be tough to get something that sounds really amazing. But there's a sense of what you could do. I think with your Rodecaster, what you could do is definitely apply a high pass filter. That'll be the number one thing, and you've got a high pass filter there in the Rodecaster Pro, so that's an option. Okay, we have an interesting comment, Danny says. Let's go ahead and take a look at our interesting comment. You've got an 80 hertz large peak there. Cut a sharp Q at 80 hertz and it will fix it. Okay, let's try that. I can see it on my scope when you play the audio. Between 80 and 100. Okay, fair enough. Let's go to our EQ. Let's pull up this band. We'll put this at, maybe we'll put it at 90 since it's between 80 and 100. I can go ahead and pull this down. We can go ahead and turn the high pass off for now since we already applied that. Let's go ahead and preview.
My mother said that when I meet a hedgehog...
Stop. Preview.
Jaguar, because this is very important. My Jaguar, because this is very important.
Okay, that actually does a pretty nice job. Thank you for that. I didn't see the person's name who put that up, but...
Famous Army Studio.
Famous Army Studio, thank you for that. Yeah, so there's some good input there, I think. A EQ cut. So you could also do that, Ewan, just for your information. So you can go into the EQ. You can set the frequency to 90 hertz. I would cut it fairly substantially. We cut 8 dB. I don't know if you have to go that far. Just play it back and adjust that gain up and down. We did a cut at 8 dB and we set the Q. I can't remember on the Rodecaster if you can set the width or the Q of the EQ cuts, but if you can, you're going to want to make it a little bit more narrow. You don't necessarily want a massive one, but if you can narrow that up a little bit, just use your ears and adjust those. So set the frequency to 90, leave that there, adjust the gain up and down, and adjust the Q or width to different spots and until you find something that sounds pretty good. So thanks so much for that. It's great to have a community with some great insights. Okay, let's go to the chat and see what else we've got going there. And I'm going to take a sip while Danny is doing that. Sip of water because I am parched. And we're going to we'll mute so you don't have to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Thanks so much for the super chat, Camille. I appreciate that for 2 cappuccinos. That's to really get things going here. JF, do you find yourself using the instant process feature, toggle with I, when working on obvious areas that need attenuating, declick, or repair, to name a few? Absolutely, I do. Let me just show you what that looks like for those that are not familiar with it. All right, you can turn on this instant process down here at the bottom, and it allows you to do different things. You can do the attenuate, replace. There are a few others. I often use the declick, to be honest. So if I'm really quickly doing a pass to take care of the mouth clicks and things like that, the declick does a pretty nice job. But yes, you can certainly use the attenuate. And basically what that does, if we switch back over to this sample, you'll notice here if I pull up the brush and as I paint, it immediately does the work on that. So it just attenuates it very quickly on the spot like that. And in fact, let's just see what that sounds like. It looks like it might be doing, visually at least, a pretty decent job. Let's go ahead and turn off the instant process. Come back over here and play that back again. In here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense. Yeah, you still can hear a little bit of it, but yeah, that's another thing that you can do is definitely use that instant process to attenuate. And in fact, at this point, we could go to replace. And let's just see what that does here for us. Got to be careful getting close to the dialogue. It's going to pull from the dialogue. So you have to be very careful about that. There's holding down the Option key to erase some of your selection. This is again on replace mode here. So it's going to be reading around the selection to decide what to replace this with. And let's turn that off and go ahead and play it back again and see how it sounds now. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how realistic it is. Okay, not bad. Again, you could then do a passive voice denoise or some other, maybe spectral denoise, and clean a good bit of that up. So great, great suggestion. Thanks for bringing that up, JF. Mark, for Keith M, could be the wiring pinouts on the G4. It could, yeah. So that's where I think it probably just, if you're committed to using the G4, I'd probably just get it re-terminated. That'd be the best. Not the best approach. That would be kind of the most straightforward approach, I think. Or you could do some research. I mean, if you talk to one of the house, I know you're in, I think, Keith, you said you're in Philadelphia, Gotham Sound in New York. If you give them a call, they could give you some good advice on what the different options are there. Another thing they could do is they could terminate with a microdot, and then you could get a microdot to 3.5 millimeter locking connector for Sennheiser. And then if at some point you do move to another wireless system, then you could swap out that microdot to Sennheiser connector for something else and be able to use that microphone with something else. So there are a variety of options there. That is what I'm going to do. Okay. Good luck. That'd be nice to be able to use your Sony as well. Christopher, well, not... What's that?
That was for Ewan's question. This what
well, not real time, maybe de-reverb plugin would help. That's possible. I think that once we actually applied the 80 or the 90 hertz cut, it really seemed to clean it up pretty nicely. I'm going to play that again.
Because this is very important.
Okay, that's without.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
And here's with.
Jaguar. Because this is very important.
Yeah, I don't even think at that point de-reverb is probably not necessary. I think that's just really taking care of that massive resonance at 80 to 100 hertz. So if you had RX, though, that would be another thing you could do. But in Ewan's case, I think since he has a Rodecaster, doesn't even need it. I think just managing that resonance will take care of it.
Here are his applications.
I use it for voice recognition software while being on a phone call at the same time. Okay.
And also.
Or as an extra track to record notes when making field recordings about what is being recorded on the main stereo track. Okay. All right. All right. So in that case, real-time processing, it sounds like when you're on the phone call, that's where the Rodecaster could definitely help with that cut at 90 hertz. Mark asks, did anyone see the new ATEM Mini SDI release? I did, and I'm sure others have too. It's an interesting it's an interesting product. And I think there are probably some people that will find it very useful. For me, even though I do use some SDI sources, so my main camera here is SDI, and I could use a Canon C70 as an overhead camera. No, that doesn't have an SDI output. That's HDMI. So for me, what would have been more compelling to me personally, not that this is representative of everyone else, but to me, something with 4 SDI and 4 HDMI would have made more sense for me. But I think there are probably people out there doing live events where they need to do the long cable runs, so everything's going to be on SDI anyway, where it makes sense for them. So instead of having a rack mount, they wanted to have an ATEM Mini Extreme to do it. They could definitely do it. So interesting. I am skeptical that they're going to sell a lot of those. I think they'll sell a few, but not very many. It's really pretty special purpose, I think. Thanks for bringing that up, Mark. Shoji, question: with Ventura macOS on the horizon, what is your Izotope update strategy? Well, let me talk about my OS update strategy. I don't update my OS for several months after it comes out. So Ventura, which will probably, I believe, comes out this fall. They usually come out in the fall. Usually, historically, I have not updated until well into the first part of quarter 1 the following year. So, for example, this year we are on what is even in the name of Monterey is the current OS for Mac OS, and I think I updated to that in February or March. And there are a few reasons for that. One is for the other apps to kind of catch up. We also have, to complicate matters, we also have the Apple transition to Apple Silicon going at the same time. And so it wasn't until just recently that Izotope updated some of its tools, not even all of them yet, to run natively on Apple Silicon. So there's that going on at the same time. And then the biggest thing, though, is my Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo interface. Usually those drivers are not certified until well into the first quarter of the next year. So I wait. That's generally the thing I'm waiting for, is for those. I don't have time to be kind of messing around too much with that. Like I can't do a bunch of troubleshooting and rolling back and all that business. So if I'm going to make videos, I have to be working, not futzing around with drivers and stuff. So that's usually what I do. And it's the same with Izotope. If it hasn't been certified, I usually give them a few months. Usually the software is done before the drivers are done. So usually the driver is the longest tent pole, if you will, the one that you have to wait for. And then once that's done, most other things. Well, unless you're talking about things like Pro Tools. Pro Tools is, seems like it sometimes that it moves at the pace of molasses in January. But Camille, you use a Pearl Nano to encode. Why don't you use the Blackmagic Extreme for that? Okay. This is actually a follow-up topic. We've actually talked about this before. There is something about my internet connection or something in the network chain here that makes it so that the internal encoders on the Blackmagic ATEM Minis, and it includes all of them, the ATEM Mini Pro, ATEM Mini Pro ISO, ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. All three of them I've tested. I think it was back in January, I just started having a problem where I would start the stream on the ATEM and it would stream for about 30 seconds and then YouTube would freak out and say, hey, we're not getting anything. And the ATEM thought it was doing nothing in essence. I sent the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO back to Blackmagic support so they could take a look at it. From their perspective, they said everything's working fine. I have an internet connection that is a gigabit upstream and downstream with the ping to the provider is usually around 2 milliseconds, so it's a very good connection. I don't have any problems with the encoder on the Pearl Nano, the Pearl 2, or any software encoders, Ecamm Live, OBS. None of those have had any problems whatsoever over the exact same connection with the exact same Ethernet cables through the exact same router, through the exact same service provider. So I have no explanation for what that is, but it seems that the ATEM Mini encoders are doing something that either my service provider doesn't like or my router doesn't like, and I don't know what that is. So that's why I use the Pearl Nano instead. That's the long story. Okay.
Okay, this is back to the ATEM SDI thing.
Okay, back to the ATEM SDI thing. Aaron Parecki said the same thing. They should have had a mix of HDMI and SDI ports. Yeah, that would have been, for me, that would have been ideal. But again, it's a special product for I don't know who. It's a special product for someone who doesn't want to have a rack mount ATEM, which I don't understand. Like if you're going on location to do conferences at hotels and stuff all the time and you're doing the live switching, I don't know why you wouldn't want to just have another thing in your rack as opposed to this thing that's going to flop around and you have to get a dedicated Pelican case with padding in it. I don't know. I don't really understand what the appeal is, but yeah, I would agree with Aaron. I would have rather had, honestly, for me, what would make sense is 2 SDI inputs and 6 HDMI inputs. But I realize that I'm not representative of probably the market they're going after with that. Camille says, do you use compression in your live stream YouTube? If so, how much? What do you recommend? In many situations, people exaggerate and it sounds unnatural. Well, I will say I'm using compression right now. My question for you, Camille, does it sound unnatural? And the answer to your question is not very much. I use some compression. When I laugh, for example, it will compress a little bit more. But when I'm just talking, it is just barely, I have a little VU meter. It's basically a gain reduction meter in this case. And it's just barely tickling it. And that's generally how I like to approach it. Also, in my video, I believe it was last week, we talked about, it was specific to the Rodecaster Pro, but it was a way to set up a compressor that is very kind of light-handed, that will prevent clipping, but will not generally sound really harsh or unnatural. So if you want to see the specific settings that we used, you could take a look at that. But in this case here, I'm using a 3-to-1 compression ratio. My threshold is set to, now this is not dB full scale, this is dBu. My ratio is set to about 0 dBu. Sorry, my threshold is set to 0 dBu. Ratio is 3-to-1. And then as far as attack and release, this doesn't have the Shelford channel, which I'm using to do the compression here. It doesn't have a separate attack and release setting. Instead, it has, I don't even know what they call it. I think they call it the speed setting. But I have it set to medium slow. So it's actually not attacking. In this case, it's not. It has a pretty slow release. To me, that's the important thing with dialogue, is that if you have a really fast release, it starts to have this pumping sound, and it sounds very unnatural. If you leave a little bit of a longer release, and again, I would say, 200 milliseconds, and oftentimes I'm using like a 500 millisecond release. The problem if you go longer is that the breaths can get really exaggerated sometimes, so somewhere between 200 and 500 milliseconds, depending on the voice. But those are kind of the general settings. And then I do have some makeup gain here as well. In this case, I'm adding about 6 dB of makeup gain. So after it does the compression, it's boosting by 6 dB. So good question on that. Camille says, you sound natural, not broadcasty. Yeah, that's because we're using a pretty light touch here. So I think if you use a light touch, it's tastefully done, and it evens things out just enough to make it easy for people to listen to. That's my approach. Okay. Do we have anything else in the chat? Nothing else in the chat? What? Okay. Well, oh, take that back. We do have something in the chat. Danny just found. JF, what are your go-to headphones for mixing these days? I think I see you wearing DT 900s today. These are actually the DT 700 Pros. I do have the DT 700 Pro X. I do have the 900 Pro X as well. So typically if I'm doing a dialogue edit or mix, I will use the DT 900 Pro X to get in and really hear all the nuances and do the cleanup. Once I've got that managed, I usually take the headphones off and go back to near field monitors. I don't like to be in headphones all day long. One thing I did receive recently and I'm testing right now is a company called Mina. They contacted me and we went and made some impressions of my ears, and they made some custom in-ear monitors for me. I don't like in-ear monitors generally. This is my first set of custom in-ear monitors, and wow, these are really, really impressive so far. So we'll be talking about those more in the future, but typically you will find me on the DT 900 Pro X when I'm doing mixing, usually more dialogue editing. Okay, Daniel. Have an unrelated question, but my Neumann 102 TLM seems to need almost 48 to 50 dB gain to peak just above the mid in the green zone on the Rodecaster 2. Isn't that a lot for a condenser? Bit confused. Not necessarily. No, I'm often into the 50s with condenser mics. I mean, it depends on how far the mic is from you, how loud your voice is, but I don't see that as unusual at all necessarily. I don't see a problem. Does anyone see a problem with that? Out there in the chat, let us know. Daniel, thank you for the question. That doesn't concern me initially as I think about it. Does it sound okay? That's the real question. Does it sound good? Camille says compliments for the Flower Power shirt. This is my new birthday shirt. Thank you, Danny, for this.
Yes, you're welcome.
So thanks for the compliments. I'll pass those right on. We just did. All right. Christopher says custom IEMs are the real deal. I've been using them for about 15 years. They really work. Yeah. I would just say this, that what they do is they actually form fit them to your ear canal. And so the problem with in-ear monitors, and I have some pricey ones. These are some West Tones here. They were over $500, and they come with a whole set of little the foam covers to put on each of the monitors to kind of tune it for your specific ear canal. But I have just never been able to get good sound out of them. What happens is I just can't get the bass. And these have 5 drivers in each of them, so they're, I don't know, maybe it's the shape of my ears, I don't know, but the custom in-ears are just an absolute night and day difference between them. So they're not going to be inexpensive. That's the thing with in-ear monitors. They are not inexpensive. You have to go to an audiologist. They will pull any wax that's in your ear canal out. They'll take an impression, send those to the manufacturer, and then they will make a set that are specific for your ear shape. And what that does is it basically seals the ear canal so that you can pick up the bass response. Otherwise, you're not going to get the bass response whatsoever. They just always sound really tinny. I had a pair of Shure in-ears as well, and they were just super, super tinny sounding and just could never find the right fit for them. So, Ewan, might try RX Reverb. Any thoughts for the plug-in order if using this with the other suggestions from today's live stream? I would stay away from Reverb. I wouldn't do it. Ewan, I don't think you need it. Based on the audio sample here, I think that cut at 90 hertz is really the answer to your issues. Or at least I'd start there. Then if it's still a problem, then I would go to the Reverb after that. But from what I'm hearing right here, Reverb is only, I think, in the standard and advanced versions. So you're talking about spending as much as you spend on your Rodecaster for plugins, which I don't know. I mean, it's up to you, of course, but I would not. All right, Dariush, just a simple question. I know it is not. I have a Rode Video Mic NTG. Is it good enough to record my videos, or I need a shotgun microphone? Well, I mean, good enough is a very subjective question. So I think what's critical about any microphone, including the Video Mic NTG, is getting it in the right position. If you can boom it just out of frame above you like this, so within like 30 to 40 centimeters, I think that microphone can sound fantastic. If you put it on top of your camera and you have it 3 or 4 meters away, it's going to sound like it's 3 or 4 meters away, and there's no microphone in the world you can put on top of your camera at 3 to 4 meters away that's going to sound like a studio recording, if that's what you're aiming for. So that is my answer. The answer is your mic's fine. I would find ways to get it close, to boom it just out of frame. And then I think you're going to find that it's going to sound a lot better. We have actually a video on that. If you search for Curtis Judd on YouTube, search for Curtis Judd boom video mic. There is a video where we talk about a fairly low-cost way to buy a microphone stand that will allow you to do that, along with all the adapters to make it work. So, all right. Thank you so much for the questions, everybody. Thank you for everyone being here. Thanks so much for the input from everybody. I want to say just a couple things before we go. Just as context, the reason we do these live streams is 2 things. Number 1, we're building a community here. I love talking with others who love sound for video. And so I'm so delighted when all of you are part of this. It's really exciting for me. I really enjoy it. I hope you do too. The reason I started these originally is I have some online courses. So if there's an audio recorder you're looking how to learn, like a MixPre or a Zoom F-Series recorder, we have some courses on that. We have a course on production sound. We have a course for sound for the ATEM Mini line. So if any of those are of interest to you, if you could take a look at school.learnlightandsound.com, you can find those there. All right. I think we've covered everything. Just to double check here. Yep, I think we're good. Everybody get out there, make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.